Hi everybody and welcome to Poppa's Picks for week 3 of the NFL season, brought to you by FantasyDonks.com, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know to start playing daily fantasy football. I'm Sean Big Poppa Williams, and I'll just be presenting my pick segment as usual to you, so hopefully we can all make good money this week in daily fantasy football. As usual, we'll start off with the quarterbacks, and my first quarterback pick for you this week is Jay Cutler, playing the Monday Night Football game against the New York Jets at New York. The Jets give up over 21 points to opposing quarterbacks each week in fantasy football, and their secondary is ranked dead last against the pass. As I said before, this is Monday Night Football. Jay Cutler tends to beast up on Monday Night Football. I'm going to like Cutler's targets later on in the segment. I think Cutler makes a dynamic play that a lot of people may not be on, and I think you'll really like the results if you play Jay Cutler this week. The second quarterback I have for you is Matt Stafford versus Green Bay. Vegas has this as the highest over-under line of the week at 52 points, and they have it being a shootout. The Packers secondary is really bad, and the only issue I have with this game is that the Packers run defense is so bad that does Bush or Bell take away from Stafford's totals by getting too many carries and too many touchdowns on the ground, taking advantage of that Packers run D. I don't think that is going to be the case this week, as Bell and Bush both catch a lot of balls from Stafford. I think if they get into the end zone, it'll be via pass. Therefore, you're still getting points from Stafford. I think Stafford makes a great play. That leads us to the third quarterback I have, which is the other side of this game, and that's Aaron Rodgers against the Lions. As I said, Vegas predicts this game to be a shootout, and the Lions' defensive stats are a little bit skewed, being that they played the Giants, who were awful week 1. But if you paid attention last week, Cam Newton passed all over their defense, and let's be honest, he isn't Aaron Rodgers, and I think Aaron Rodgers could have a monster week. Look for his targets that we'll talk about later as well to have monster weeks as well. The fourth quarterback I have for you today is that of Matt Castle. And you're probably looking at yourself and saying, really, dude, Matt Castle? I'm going to completely be honest here. This pick has me throwing up in my mouth a little bit. But when you look at the matchup, it's a great matchup from even Matt Castle and his terrible arm. He will be very low owned because of his terrible performance last week. There's a 49-point over-under on this game that Vegas has put out, and they should be behind most of the game, behind the Saints, and should be passing the ball quite a bit. The Saints have given up the most points to opposing quarterbacks in the first 2 weeks of the season at almost 22 points per game. Matt Castle makes a sexy pick, and he's super cheap. So you can save money to spend on running backs and wide receivers this week by making a Castle play, and he should have a good week at a low price tag. The fifth pick is always the risk-reward pick here on Poppa's Picks. And for this week, that pick is Ryan Tannehill versus the Kansas City Chiefs. I've said it before and I'll say it again. My Chiefs are terrible this year. The defense is depleted and by injury, and is only getting more depleted by injury, as this week we will be without our all-pro safety Eric Berry. I realize Tannehill has underperformed to this point in the season so far, but he has had a bad matchup against the Patriots secondary. I think this can be his coming out party, as the Chiefs really don't have any legit cornerbacks. Their safeties are questionable. I think Tannehill can have a monster day via Wallace, via Charles Clay. We'll talk about those targets a little bit later in the segment, but just keep a huge lookout for the cheap Ryan Tannehill as a great risk-reward play for this week. Now that we've covered quarterbacks, let's get to the running backs. And number 1 on the running back list I have for you this week is Giovanni Bernard versus Tennessee. Now, Tennessee got gashed last week by DeMarco Murray putting up a monster game. And let's be honest, Jamal Charles would have had a monster game against Tennessee if Andy Reid could have figured out that you should run your star back more than 9 times in a football game. I think that Giovanni Bernard here will put up a monster. There might even be so many points scored on the ground that Jeremy Hill makes a good, cheap alternative. He might even put up close to 20 points this week. I like both of those running backs against Tennessee. Tennessee's defense is garbage, and Locker doesn't look like their offense can do anything, which means more running and attack when the Bengals are going to be ahead. The second running back I have for you, this is a twofer, is Bush and Bell. And I mentioned them a little bit earlier versus Green Bay. I think both these guys will put up solid points. Green Bay's run defense, as I said, is even worse than their pass defense, which is saying something. And they both have a depressed price tag after having disappointing weeks last week against the amazing Carolina Panthers run defense. So I think you can take advantage of their depressed price tags. I think they're both in play here. They both catch a lot of balls, which equals a lot of points in daily fantasy football. I think it's a great play for you. And I think a lot of people are going to be staying away from them because of their output last week. The third running back I have for you this week is that of Alfred Morris against Philadelphia. I realize Alfred Morris doesn't catch balls, but I don't think that'll be a problem for you this week. The Colts ran so easily last week against the Eagles D that Luck didn't really even have to throw the ball. Trent Richardson went for 95 combined yards against the Eagles. I want you to think about that. Trent Richardson went for 95 yards. And that doesn't even include the amazing game Ahmad Bradshaw had, going for well over 100 yards and over 20 fantasy football points against Philly's D last week. Take advantage of Alfred Morris. He is pricey, but he has the ability to put up a monster against Philly's terrible run defense. The fourth pick I have for you today in the running back section is that of Ridley and Vereen versus the Raiders. We all know that the Raiders defense is horrendous. They love to give up points to opposing running backs. They're a bottom 5 team against the run this year, and I think the Patriots just pound them to death like everyone else has. To be honest, the only problem with picking Patriots running backs is Bill Belichick likes to do you dirty, and when you tend to be on Ridley, that's the week Vereen goes off, and when you tend to be on Vereen, that's the week Ridley goes off. I'm leaning towards Ridley this week just because Vereen is listed as questionable with an injury. Also, Ridley hasn't been fumbling the ball this year. And like I said, the Raiders defense loves to give up huge yardage to opposing running backs. I think either one of those guys make a great play, and they're at a depressed price tag this week. That brings us to the fifth pick I have for you this week at running back. And this is the risk-reward play of Justin Forsett versus the Browns. The Browns are really bad against the run, and Forsett is dirt cheap across the board. He's almost minimum on a few sites. He's on extra rest coming off their Thursday night game last week, and Bernard Pierce has had fumbling issues. And let's be honest, Bernard Pierce didn't look great last year and hasn't looked great in his limited carries this year. He only beat Forsett by 1/10 of a point last week, which is a yard, right? Like, I think that Justin Forsett's going to see the lion's share of the carries against the Browns defense that is bottom 5 in the league against the run. I think Justin Forsett can have a monster game, and at his price tag, he makes this week's risk-reward play very sexy. Let's move on to wide receivers now that we've covered the running backs. And the number one wide receiver I have for you is a twofer, and that's Jordy Nelson and Randall Corn on the Cob versus the Lions. Now, last week we got a glimpse of what Aaron Rodgers and this offense can do, and that was just in the second half, in all honesty. Both of these guys went for 20-plus points last week. Jordy almost hit 40, and they just have a juicy matchup against an untested Detroit Lions defense that gave up a lot of yardage to Cam Newton and his passing attack last week. You have the highest over-under here. It's supposed to be a shootout. I love both Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb. The second wide receiver I have for you is Jay Cutler's prime target, Brandon Marshall. and his secondary target, Alshon Jeffries. I'm going to give you a 2 for here. The Jets are dead last in surrendering points to wide receivers. Their corners wouldn't even be playing on most other teams. Brandon Marshall loves to beast on Monday Night Football. Alshon Jeffries is a great wide receiver. I already told you that I love Jay Cutler as a quarterback this week. I think that the Bears are going to come out and just destroy the Jets via the air, and I want a piece of that. I'm all over Brandon Marshall this week. My third pick for you at wide receiver this week is that of Mike Wallace versus the Kansas City Chiefs. I know he hasn't shown up yet, just like Tannehill, but I think this is the game. I mean, it pains me to say it, but my Chiefs are just terrible. Wallace carries a depressed price tag with him this week and has probably the best ceiling of anyone at the depressed price tag range. He's facing that decimated Chiefs defense without any legit corners and without Eric Berry. Only makes the situation worse for Kansas City. I think Mike Wallace makes a really sexy play on a lot of the sites at his price tag. The number 4 wide receiver I have for you this week is that of Larry Fitzgerald versus the 49ers. Now, most people would like to say that the 49ers defense is really legit. However, statistically, they're at the bottom of the league against wide receivers. And if most people are going to be on this game, I believe they're going to be on Floyd. However, if you look to last week, Fitzy actually saw the most targets with the backup quarterback in, who is playing again this week for the injured Carson Palmer. And I would expect that trend to continue. Trust in the old reliable veteran that'll catch everything you throw at him. I think Fitzgerald makes a sneaky play that not a lot of people will be on, and I think he can make you a lot of money this week. Now, the number 5 wide receiver is my risk-reward play at wide receiver this week is that of Greg Jennings. Now, I know he had 1 catch last week against the Patriots, but the Patriots defense, is really legit, and he was being shadowed by Aqib Talib a lot of that game. I think that against the Saints that he will see a ton of targets in this game because the Vikings will be behind. I think his ownership's going to be near the bottom because of that terrible game he had last week between him and Castle. And if Castle can manage not to throw 3+ interceptions this week against the Saints' terrible secondary, I believe that Greg Jennings could have a monster. Once again, this is sort of contrarian, as the mainstream, I believe, of players will pick Cordarrelle Patterson this week, and I love Greg Jennings to actually have a monster. He's got a great ceiling that he can hit. I think he's the play, the risk-reward play this week at wide receiver. But now that we've summed up wide receivers, let's move right along to tight ends and knock those out. Number 1, no surprise, Jimmy Cocoa Puff, Jimmy Graham. It's Jimmy. He's matchup proof. They're playing the Vikings. The Vikings aren't good. He's going to cost you a ton, but he may be the best option this week, as a lot of the mid-tier, the next group of tight ends have really rough matchups, and the great matchups are with cheap and questionable guys that we'll cover here in a second. So Jimmy Graham, pay up for him if you can. Put him in your lineup. I think you'll have a monster this week. The second tight end I have for you, and this should be no surprise to anyone that's paid attention, is Jared Cook versus Dallas. Now, I realize Jared Cook has in the past disappointed a lot of fantasy owners after last season coming out of the gates week 1, putting up a 30-burger and then disappearing for the rest of the season. So far this season, he's seen the same amount of targets each game, and both games put up roughly like 12 points, I believe, in fantasy football. Those aren't phenomenal games, but then again, he hasn't played the Dallas Cowboys defense. We know how much, if you played it all last week, you saw how easily Delaney Walker thrashed this defense at the tight end position and scored multiple touchdowns. I think he is a great play this week. The problem is that most of the pundits out there are on Jared Cook, so he'll be extremely highly owned. And I don't think that most people are accounting for the fact that he has a third-string quarterback. So, his price tag's nice. Play him if you want to. If you feel that Dallas matchup, I like him. I'm just not sure that I like him over some of these other guys. The third pick for you at tight end is that of Dennis Pitta at Cleveland. The Browns are weak against the tight end, and Joe Hayden, the specialty of their defense, will most likely be occupied on Steve Smith, their main pass catcher. We all know that Torrey Smith can't catch balls half the time, so he's not a viable target. The Ravens may run a lot on the Browns. Sorry about that, guys. Phone call. The Ravens may run a lot this week on the Browns, but I think that that'll open up the play action passing to the tight end. Dennis Pitta should have a huge game this week. Let's move on to the fourth tight end that I have for you, and that is Charles Clay versus Kansas City. My Chiefs are just awful against the tight end. The two people that normally guard tight ends, and Derek Johnson and Eric Berry, are out with injuries. Tannehill should be able to hit Charles Clay early and often and could put up a monster game. We know how bad the Chiefs are. I think this may be a coming out party for the Dolphins offense. It's a good chance to get on it at a cheap price tag. My fifth pick is the risk-reward pick at tight end, and that's Derek Carrier of the San Francisco 49ers against the Arizona Cardinals. As I've told you before in previous broadcasts, Arizona is really bad versus the tight end, and Carrier is the only tight end left on the San Francisco 49ers roster. VD is doubtful at this point in time with his injury sustained to his knee and ankle last week. If Carrier remains the only option that the Niners have, if VD is scratched from this game, I think he'll have a great game and put up monster numbers. I mean, look at the numbers he had last week in limited action. He put up a decent stat line in limited action last week. I think that makes him a sexy play at tight end. Hopefully you found Poppa's picks insightful, and hopefully we can make a lot of money on it. I'm Sean Big Poppa Williams. You can reach me at Big Poppa Debate on Twitter. That's BIGPOPPADB and the number 8. Feel free to check out the site at fantasydonks.com. Thank you for watching the video, and have a great one.